Good day to everyone. I'm Larry Spencer. I'm part of the PSU 150th anniversary celebration that's talking to some of our retired faculty and staff about their time period that they spent at Plymouth. And so today I'm talking with Bob Tuveson. And so we usually begin, the first question is, Bob, when did you arrive in Plymouth, and what were your duties when you first came to Plymouth?
I arrived in August of 1978. I applied for the job in 77, but another fellow got it, a guy by the name of Bob Sherman. And Jim Smith, former dean of students, contacted me and said Bob was leaving and would I still be interested in the job. So I came up a year after I applied initially, applied a second time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your exact title?
I was the director of financial aid.
Okay. And did you remain in that same position the whole time that you
I
were
did,
employed?
for 25 years.
Okay, and so that would mean you retired in what year then?
2003.
Okay. And one of the things that we ask all of our people is, what was their impression of Plymouth when they arrived in Plymouth?
Well, I knew Plymouth. I'm a New Hampshire resident, born and raised in Portsmouth, worked at the University of New Hampshire for 9 years, knew the aid director, former aid director here, Claire Smith. And so I was aware of Plymouth. Some of my classmates in high school came to Plymouth. I was a graduate of Portsmouth.
Interesting. Yeah. And when you arrived, I know for sometimes with the faculty we have a sort of a mentoring system. Did you have any kind of mentoring system where any person from the administration sort of was to help you get integrated into the system, or did you sort of have to do it all on your own?
Actually, the director of financial aid, basically most of the programs here were federal, and you had to apply by those rules, of course. So I really didn't have a mentor. Claire left Plymouth and went down to Keene State,
Right.
and so I basically I was kind of on my own with a couple of staff members and went from there.
And how much, one of the things we ask a lot of faculty is, how much interaction did they have with students? Now, of course, being financial aid, I assume you probably don't necessarily deal with them directly, but indirectly.
No, I dealt with a lot of students. Dealt with a lot of students. Of course, our office did. We had the work-study program, the work program on campus. A lot of students needed help. Parents were in all the time interviewing students. We used to have a short-term loan fund that, when I initially got here, helped students pay their bills, so you had to have student contact then. So there was a lot of student contact, and one of the things that I liked most about my job.
And what was your impression of the students then as compared to, 25 years later when, before you retired, of the students that you had then or knew at that particular time?
Well, I think they were pretty much the same. When I first came here, the undergraduate enrollment was about 2,750, and it's interesting, when I retired, it was up over 4,000, maybe 4,200. I'm not sure what the numbers were, undergraduate and graduate.
Right, because we had a mix there.
It really grew. A couple of times during my tenure here, we went a little bit deeper into the barrel. We had to get our enrollment up. I don't know if you recall that. Maybe
I can remember a disaster that we had.
There were a couple of times, and you brought some bad apples in, and that's what happened. A lot of those students, we didn't retain them, and they caused problems while they were on campus. But once we got rolling, I think we did a pretty good job with additional students as we progressed through those years.
I know after that year we pleaded with Don Wharton to never do that again to us. And the problem was, it wasn't so much that there were a number of students that got brought in that did okay, but it was the ones that didn't do okay that pulled down some of their roommates along with them. I think I had one advisee by the end of that semester had up like a .02. And the only reason they had up like a .02 was they had passed badminton or something like that.
Yeah.
Everything else they had flunked. So you said you've been familiar with the town, but how was it living in the town other than just driving through as many people, on the way to Cannon or someplace like that?
Well, my wife was very fortunate. When we came up here, I guess it was during my interview, she was looking for, when we found out we had the job, we were looking for property in house, and she ran into Don Cosgrove, who was then the superintendent of schools, and he said, you look at the school systems around, but I would suggest that you stay with Plymouth Elementary or over in Holderness. And we were fortunate to find a house in Holderness, and were able to. We owned our home in Portsmouth, so we were able to sell and buy, and it worked out pretty well. We really enjoyed being in Holderness. I liked being away from from downtown Plymouth. You know,
Right,
you could
right.
leave the campus and go home at night, even though it was only a couple miles
Right,
away.
and not be too far away.
Yeah, and I know you lived in Holderness for
Right.
most of your time here too,
Yeah, in
Larry.
fact, this is our fifth year
Yeah.
of living in Holderness and being at the college. So,
Yeah, we've been here now for this is over 44 years for
wow,
us.
that's a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
Now, you also raised your children here. What was the kind of experience that they had?
Oh, they had a wonderful experience. I have an interesting story to tell. I'll tell it real quickly here. I had
That's
an
fine.
opportunity. My goal in financial aid was to be at a flagship school. And the aid director at UNH, was there for 9 years, was there. He ended up being there for 40 years. I wasn't going anyplace, but I wanted to have my own shop. I wanted to be a
Right.
director. And my goal was to be at a flagship in northern New England. The Maine and the Vermont job opened up within a couple of months of each other. And I had an opportunity to apply to both of those schools. I was going to apply. And I told the boys one Friday night after they returned from skiing, you know, the elementary school would go to the mountain and ski on Friday afternoons. And I told the boys I was going to embellish my resume and apply and become hopefully an aid director at one of those schools. And there was silence at the table, and my oldest boy said, "That's great, Dad. You can come home weekends." Larry, I never applied. I never applied. We've been here all that time. Yeah.
Well, as you will understand, it was a great place to raise kids in terms
Absolutely.
of the
Yeah.
Holderness school system was really, I thought, was very excellent, and Plymouth was the same way.
Yeah.
Although you probably saw some changes in the Plymouth High School from the time that your boys were there as compared to what it is right now.
Well, our boys didn't go to Plymouth High.
Okay.
Plymouth High. They went to Holderness School, and my
Oh,
wife worked
okay.
there for a while.
Okay.
So the youngest one was able to. Both of them went as day students. It was
Okay.
just right up the street from us.
Right,
We
right.
live
It was
very near,
very close.
so that worked out pretty well. Yeah.
And so, what kind of, how did what were your interactions with the administration, and how did that change over the 25 years that you were here? I mean, some people, like when I came, Harold Hyde was the president, and a lot of people said it was like a big high school, and Harold was the principal, and he had his finger on everything. You came after Harold, I guess?
Yeah, Kaz Marking was the president when I came, and he was here for several years. Bill Farrell was president at the time. Matey Barrett was in the office for a couple of years, and then the last several years, Don Wharton was president. But I had good relationships with presidents. I really enjoyed working with Dean Smith. And the staff in student affairs had a very good staff, and I enjoyed working with Chuck Bailey, the director of admissions. Worked pretty closely with him. Financial aid and admissions go hand in hand.
Right,
right. And so I felt this was a wonderful place to be. I felt the staff was very good. The faculty was good. I felt comfortable here during my 25-year tenure.
And you, well, I guess you can say you gave out a lot of money during that time period, I assume.
Well, a lot of, when people ask me, well, you were working at Plymouth State, what did you teach? They always would, people ask you that. I said, no, I had an interesting job. I gave away money, just like you said, Larry. And as you know, you taught for so many years. Plymouth State saw a lot of first generation students. I was a first generation student. My brothers were, and that was very rewarding for me to help those families go through the financial aid process and enroll and succeed. So that was one of the pluses of the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, you said you had some work-study students that, over the years. Have you kept in contact, or have they kept in contact with you, and how have they followed in your footsteps to become, directors of financial aid?
Well, it's funny that you asked. Not only work-study students, but people that work for me. I kind of have a funny story. We're green and white, and Dartmouth is green and white. I lost 2 assistant directors to Dartmouth.
Oh, no kidding.
So, and one of them was a former work-study with a student with me for 4 years, And I hired her after she came back. She was in Japan for a while. I hired her as an assistant director. She was with me for 4 or 5 years, and then they snatched her over to Dartmouth. And then I had a young man come to me, lived here in town, applied for the job, and Dartmouth took him away from me too. So I felt good about it because I'm sure they felt that they were well trained.
Right.
The young lady that worked with me has been involved. She's been involved with a loan agency in Massachusetts, and she's still doing that, I believe. And David, the other young man that went to Dartmouth, is now the director of financial aid at Smith College.
Oh wow!
So they stayed in the
they stayed in the same
business.
career
Yeah.
kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's always nice to, sometimes as faculty members and even staff, we don't know until about 34 years later that we had some impact on some of our, people that we worked with, the students.
Right.
Every so often, I just got an email from somebody that lives out in, I think, Rumley or Warren, saying, I had you 50 years ago, and I never told you that I really appreciate, what it was like to have you as an instructor. So,
Yeah.
What did you, I guess you probably didn't have to work anything with the student body directly, like in terms of the student government or anything like that.
No, we had to work with some faculty committees on academic standings and those making sure that the students were making satisfactory progress. Not too much with student organizations, although when I first came, the office used to handle student activity funding.
Oh, okay,
and that was
right.
one of the things that we moved over to the student union. Another thing that we were handling was loan collection. And that really, you shouldn't be collecting loans and giving out aid. So we worked that over into the business section. So there were some changes that we made. And that short-term loan fund that I talked about, we were having a problem collecting that money. In fact, we were audited by university system internal audit, and we had I inherited about a 72% default rate in short-term loans. So we basically weaned ourselves from that program
get out of that.
and had families deal with other lending opportunities for them. The college, that was not a good program.
Right.
Not a good program.
Now, when you were, giving out financial aid, how much of that came actually from, let's say, the state of New Hampshire as compared to the federal government? I mean, was there some sort of relationship in terms of the formula and what have you?
Well, as you know, New Hampshire and Vermont, actually, those two states ranked 49th and 50th in state aid to education, higher education. Vermont was a little bit better because they had a wonderful state scholarship program over there for their students, whether they were in state or whether they moved out of state. New Hampshire had a very small one. Most of our aid, the majority of our aid, I would say 75–80% of it was federal aid. We did not have really state aid. It was internal aid from budget that we would set money aside for tuition scholarships, that kind of thing, college scholarships, and we did not have many endowed scholarships. A teachers' college, teachers don't make a whole lot of money, our endowment was small. So
Now, did that change over the time that you were here? I mean,
a little bit, but not much.
Okay.
Not much.
Because I do see sometimes, today I think like what was it, the mortgages just gave a big chunk of money to set up an exercise room.
Yes.
And I don't know. I assume that I know we had a couple of scholarships that past people gave to the sciences in terms of being able to give that out to our students.
Yeah. Those are very helpful when donors do that. Yeah. I was gonna. I thought of something, but maybe I'll come back to it. Had a senior moment there, Larry.
We all have those, right?
Yeah, about aid. Oh, I know. At one point in time, we felt we had to increase. We really pushed for increases in aid because we weren't being competitive with our with UNH, with Keene State.
Right.
Our packages had to be, so we had to plow more money into the financial aid program, and the financial area of the college was receptive to that. In my latter years, I think more with Bill Krangle, than the prior
earlier. So
administration.
you were under a couple different CFOs then?
Yes, Jim Hobart
Okay.
and Bill Krangle, I think the two. Yeah.
And then I'm not sure, when you arrived, did we have a road going through campus, or was the road
Yes, we
closed?
did. Yes, we
Okay.
did. Yeah.
And did you have the Silver Center as it is right now, or was it like it was?
I missed
The
part of
Silver
it.
Center, was it entrance only from Main Street, or was this
Oh, no,
like,
no. That was, my wife and I contributed to that, and that was expanded.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were there then. We were there, I think the summer that I came up, they took the big tower down in the middle of campus, the big yellow
right?
tower.
That was the furnace for the whole
and
campus.
the high school, I think the high school was in the process in the late 70s of coming down. And they used to be right there on campus, because
Right.
our office was in Spear. So,
Right.
that was a former elementary school
Right.
at one point. Yeah.
And I can remember when I first came here, actually, at a dance for the high school, I was one of the people that sort of was, supposed to be there to help, make sure everybody was good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I don't know if you were here when we used to play basketball in the gymnasium.
I played basketball in the gym. Yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
that was, and the first year I was here, I actually was in Mary Lyons, and there was a bowling alley. I don't think anybody ever used it, but it was a 2-lane bowling alley.
I heard about that. Yeah, I never saw it.
Right, and then also there was a basketball court at the far end, towards the other. So, how did you see town-gown relationships? Have they changed when you were here as compared to when you retired, or?
Well, I think there were some rocky roads during that time, maybe when we brought some of those students in, but we had some difficulties on campus. And of course, I felt that most of the houses around campus were bought up by folks and as rental properties for students. And being the campus, right, being in the middle of town, and people celebrating or having parties, I think town-gown relationships were really tough. But I think as we progress through the years, and I haven't heard about too many problems since I've retired, and even maybe 5 years before I retired. I think town-gown relationships were pretty good. When we first got here, we had problems. We had some problems, I think, in the early 80s.
Well, I do remember that Don Wharton had a little bit of problem about putting his foot in his mouth, and I think the next year they hired someone to be the spokesman for the president's office. I don't know if you remember that at all.
I think it was Dick Hage, really. I think it was Dick who got involved with that more. The dean of students there
Right.
then at that time. Yeah.
What kind of relationship did you have to some of the other staff? I mean, I think the staff is, we have 3 different operating units. One is the faculty, one is the operating staff, and then the other is administrative staff.
Yeah,
Did you
PATs.
participate in any of that kind of?
Larry, I really didn't. I got very involved with organizations outside. It was part of my job. The college board, a big part of our job is dealing with students in transition, a very exciting time for families and first-year students to come in. And back in the day, it was freshmen, as you know, it's first-year student. I got to be
First-year
politically
students, yeah.
correct. But the college board had worked with a specific group of people, because we always think of them of the testing, the SAT tests and stuff. But they worked very closely with admissions people, financial aid people, and high school guidance counselors. And I was very involved with the New England Regional Office, not only on their boards, but and I got an interesting story about that you probably don't know about, and a lot of people don't know at Plymouth during that time. I did some workshops for them too in northern New England. We would always do a guidance counselor update. And the College Board also they had their own financial forms, a parent's confidential statement. We had updates on that, and I used to do workshops on that, not only for financial aid people in northern New England, but also high school counselors. So I was working there, and I also worked for the Department of Education in doing some of their programs. I know the Justice Department at one time was collusion with the Ivies and the small Ivies. I was involved with a big study in regard to that. So I would take vacation time. It was my sabbatical away from the office, kind of.
Right.
And I got involved that way. But the thing that I want to tell you about, and I don't think a lot of people know about it, the three groups had counselors. Admissions had a group, financial aid had a group, and the guidance counselor has a group. So at one time I was the chair of the financial group. At one time, Gene Fahey was the chair of the admissions group.
Okay, interesting.
And then one time I was, for 1 year, it's a 1-year appointment, I was chair of the three groups, and Gene Fahey followed me. And so I left, and Gene succeeded me. And I bet you a lot of people at Plymouth State College didn't know that two of their staff members were that involved. And that was the New England region. And you could say, well, how did that help? How did that help us? The admissions process had helped us because our names were out there. Gene was very affable. He was wonderful. Chuck was good. They always seemed to have a wonderful staff in admissions. And the guidance counselors got to know the staff at Plymouth, and I think that really helped us, not only from New Hampshire guidance counselors, but from New England, because we needed those, especially the Greater Boston area.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess we need even more of that today with declining high school populations in New England.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes just to the high school populations like that.
Right.
And then I was on national committees with the College Board, and then I worked very closely with the New Hampshire financial aid group. That was important. We wanted to stay on top of federal regulations and that kind of thing. So my emphasis, and you were asking about committees on campus, I was more involved off campus than on. Yeah.
Well, it does make a difference. I know sometimes even today they say you have a biology department at Plymouth, and you say, well, wait a minute, we are a full university or college, that we should have one,
Yeah.
And so sometimes people off campus don't realize, the quality of what we have on campus, so it's important, I think, like what you did, to be in other groups so outside people know what's going on.
Yeah.
So what were some of your interesting experiences that you had, in your time at Plymouth? Anything that you look back and say, wow, like a Christmas party or some sort of, season where the football team was victorious? And
I was accused one time of it was interesting. We had a football player here, Joe Dudek, who went on to play some professional ball, was player of the week one time when they had a strike, and I think he played for Denver. And some people were sort of looking at us saying, how did you get an athlete like that at your school? You must have given that person a lot of financial aid. And it was interesting. There was a Sports Illustrated article, and Sports Illustrated had Joe Dudek picked for the Heisman. Bo Jackson won it that year.
Yeah, he was one of the three people, right?
And he came in third or fifth or whatever. Yeah. But the article talked about Joe, and Joe was a student and coming from where do you live? Quincy, Mass. Coming from North Quincy High School, I believe, and his home was next to a dump, and he had a car on campus, and the car had 220 miles on it or something. I don't think that happened. There was another kind of story that our aid office was accused of in regard to our soccer players. One time we had an international student scholarship, and UNH did and Keene did. Keene went Division II in their athletic program, and they dropped their international student scholarship program. They dropped it. So I was accused of giving scholarship aid to international students. Well, a lot of international students, more international students, played soccer, and over the years, we had a lot of soccer players from Bermuda, from Canada. You probably met some of those students and had them in class. Usually very good students.
And we had one person actually that was in the chorus, the Pemmy chorus, that was on the soccer team, but also played, was on the soccer team, but was from Sweden.
Yeah. So we mostly, originally when I came, they were mostly young men because there weren't a lot of women going to school internationally, but that changed. And my goal, Larry, was to have we had 8 scholarships, so they were tuition scholarships. I wanted to have 4 women and 4 men from 8 different countries. And I succeeded and did that twice during my
Well,
tenure.
that's
and that
great.
was really pretty cool.
Right.
You know?
Well, were you here when we had a bunch of Greek students that somehow or other decided to come to Plymouth? I don't know. It would have been in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, I
You know,
mean,
also-
by some graduate students, but I don't remember.
All of a sudden, we
Greek.
had a bunch of undergraduate Greek students that thought that they could come to Plymouth because they might be able to get into med school easier
Oh,
by coming to the U.S.
I don't recall that.
And the women were outstanding students, and the guys were shirkers. They weren't dumb, but they were shirkers. You know, you really had to push them hard to make them
Yeah.
work. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. But things like that. But and then I won't tell you the school. I had a visit from a financial aid. It was back then. It was an enrollment manager. The financial aid admissions was under this person's perusal, and it was from a school. And I was quite interested in how they did their scholarship awarding, and she was interested in what we were doing here. So she came over and met with me. And she had a slip of paper with attributes of how they gave out their awards. And one of the criteria, and it's a Division III school just like Plymouth was, one of the criteria was athletics.
and
I guess I wasn't supposed to see that sheet.
but you really
because-
can't do that, right? In a
No,
division.
we couldn't do that.
Right,
And a
right.
lot of people say, well, our son has a scholarship at Plymouth for football. I said, no, they don't. They have the same financial aid as everybody else. In
Everybody else.
fact, 2 or 3 years before I retired, Larry, the NCAA was concerned about that thing, and they put their own audit out, and they would come, and maybe they still do it. I didn't have one while I was here, but they would come to your institution, as I understood it. This happened after I left. And they wanted to make sure that the athletes on the campus were getting the same type of financial aid packages as your regular student.
So there's no-
The person that was in the music department that was in plays and stuff was getting the same scholarship as somebody playing hockey or something like that. And I think Plymouth State over the years did very well with that. In fact, I told them at meetings during the time that they were brainstorming how they were going to deal with. I said, you should just go to the schools that are the most successful
and then see what they're doing
and see what they're doing,
Right.
because I think you'll find that they're taking Division I dropouts and transfer students, and that's why they're succeeding.
There's a good message there, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not quite to the 30-minute thing, but what we often do towards the end is to say, is there anything that we haven't covered in this interview that you think you might want to, bring up for posterity? Because what we hope to do with these, and we have put some of them when the PSU 150th was going on. We put some of them up on Facebook or Facebook, YouTube, or something like that, so people could look at them. But the idea that Louise and I had is that we want to put these in the archive so that 50 years from now, someone can come into the archive and say, "Whoa, what was Plymouth like?" In 1970, or what were the faculty or what were the staff like, or who were those staff members? So is there anything that you want to sort of leave to posterity in this interview that we haven't talked about?
Well, no, I think you're very well of it. You talked about the road through the middle of campus. I mean, some of the things that happened during those 25 years, like the integration and bringing the campus together with that walk right through the middle of campus, and some of the work. We had a wonderful man, Steve Sweedler, I believe, on our campus doing
the horticulturist.
just really doing a wonderful job with planting, and I noticed a big difference when he retired, but he did a lot of wonderful things all over our campus.
Well, I know he worked closely with Sue Murray, because Sue taught one of the courses where she would take the kids out where they had to identify plants and things like that. And she and Steve would say, well, we need, such and such a plant here, or, we need this kind of thing right here, so we have a diversity of plants,
Yeah.
not only native plants, but, some other ones that
Right.
people need to know about.
Right. I started a program. It was called the Undergraduate Fellowship Program. I brought it sort of from the back of my mind from UNH. They had an undergraduate student program in the arts, but I I stretched it out. I don't know if it still is intact, but it's something that really, really worked well, not only for departments, but it worked well for students. It might be like an internship, Larry, and we had them. We had them in the art department. I remember Manny Sterling had one for his, what was the program that he had?
Oh,
Medieval
the Medieval Forum, right.
Yeah, there was one there. I think there was one down in the music department. I don't know if the science area had one, but we expanded them. We had 15 or 20 on campus, and it basically was a certain amount of money. It wasn't like work study where you had an hourly. You had sort of like a salary for the semester, and you would work, and of course the departments had a chance to, and faculty members had a chance to pick those students. It really was a good program.
Yeah, I think we did that because often, one of the tough courses for kids to get through is anatomy and physiology, and so I think we had some sort of intern there that was sort of there to help those kids, not as well, I guess maybe almost as a tutor, but for kids that have problems could go to that rather than, I mean, they could go to the faculty member, but sometimes they feel better going to a fellow student, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I think we had one over in the foreign student labs, a similar kind of thing, helping the student there.
So,
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being willing to do this interview.